Chapter 4, Lightning Breaking Through the Air.
"I'll kill you this time, Mizo,"
said the element. Mizo's eyebrows lowered, and he gave a frown. Lane pulled out a large silver and black split blade. Lane and Mizo dashed in, and the dark element jumped up, separated into two, and landed down behind Mizo and Lane just as their swords clashed. They both looked behind them.
"Damn it, Zion!"
shouted Mizo as he hurled himself towards him. He gave a slash only to see both clones disappear in between him and Lane. Shen swung back, slashing Lane in the chest, sending him flying back into a rock. Shen hurled himself back at Mizo. Both exchanging clashes, they managed to get back down on ground, in which Shen created a shadow ball. Mizo made a ball of thunder, and they both fired at each other.
Pew, pew, pew.
The balls clashed and emitted into a large vortex of light and dark. Shen's eyes grew bright, and the vortex suddenly surrounded them, trapping them in.
"Now it's just us,"
said Shen softly, gripping his sides harder. Mizo gritted his teeth and swung his blade in position. Dark energy flowed from Shen's sides and eyes, along with light energy flowing from Mizo. Power grew as their feet now started picking up full energy. They dashed at each other faster than the eye could see. Large clanking spots flickered and smacked across the field. Outside of the calm, dark vortex, stand a hopeless Lane. Letting off a growl, he created a ball of fire and flung it at the vortex. Upon impact, the fireball infulged around the vortex and was absorbed immediately. Lane lowered his head.
"Zion was supposed to be mine this time."
The vortex started strengthening, moving faster. Shen and Mizo hopped on and off walls of the vortex, both trying to get the desired kill. After 15 minutes of clashing, Shen managed a stab to Mizo's leg and landed a large slash on his back. They continued.
"I wonder what's taking them so long,"
said Mjerky, worried. Genma lowered his eyebrows and looked back behind him and then back. Nothing was said. Mizo and Shen were now using elemental blasts against each other, exchanging sword strikes and powerful blasts of energy, and both found it best to concentrate it all into their blades. Each clash was now an experience as if being hit with a large bomb. Few minutes after, the vortex was now an unstable powerhouse. It flickered, crackled, had electricity reminiscing all around it, and gave off a constant force so strong it was almost impossible for a human to even breathe in if they got near. Inside was an exhausted rivalry experience. All inside was gravity 20 times as powerful and winds faster than 200 miles per hour.
"He, ha, like this vortex, huh,"
muttered Zion, panting. They could barely stand after all of the built-up force. It was so unbearable that tiny shreds of their clothes flew off, and they'd spawn a cut across their body out of nowhere. Mizo took 2 small stomps forward.
"What the hell is this?"
he thought to himself. Shen dashed forward as if nothing was holding him back and landed a good 6 slashes before Mizo realized the secret.
"This vortex is feeding off our magic. I guess I've been relying on it too much."
As Shen twisted in midair for the final strike, Mizo lunged forward and knocked Shen down to the ground. Shen looked confused and jumped back. Just as he landed, he felt a massive blade enter his chest. Shen made a gagging sound.
"Not much of a vortex, is it?"
said Mizo as the vortex softly faded away into the wind. Mizo's eyes widened as he felt 2 scythes pierce through both of his lungs and out his back. Shen smiled and dropped down to the ground.
"Mizo, are you?"
said Lane as Mizo dropped to his knees, then flat on his face.
"No, how?"
Lane burst into fire and shouted out. He walked up a few steps before getting hit with an arrow through his back and out the front.
"What the?"
he said as he looked back. A man with a large sword, a man with 2 blades, and another with a large bow were seen. All were dressed in black.
"Why are his minions here? They should be dead with him,"
thought Lane. He looked behind him at Shen. He was definitely dead. Lane gave a TSK, holding the bleeding hole in his chest. He pulled his blade out and dashed at them. The bladers jumped at him with crazy speed. They hopped around slashing at each other. When the one blader came up and clanged his sword up against Lan's, the gears that were on it started spinning and grinding Lan's blade, causing dents, sparks, and eventually snapping him too and slicing into Lan's arm. Arrows constantly swung by but usually missed. After that, his broken blade just flew to the ground and he was open to everything. One arrow flew into his left arm, and the double blader gave him 3 slashes and kicked off of him so the gear blader could strike. One last slash was made and sent Lane flying back, leaving a trail of blood. Lane landed on his back and laid there. He dimly looked over at Mizo. The gear blader jumped up and prepared to finish Lane off with a nice stab to the face. Before he could reach, Lane flung a fireball into his face, sending him flying to the ground in a ball of smoke. He limply rushed towards Mizo and quickly grabbed the blade out of Kshan's body. Lane's eyes grew a bright white, and heard the voice of Mizo.
Lane, take this blade and I'll grant you my strength. Find a new elemental for me, my friend,
said Mizo as his voice faded away. The double blader flung himself at Lane. Lane twisted around and knocked the blades out of his hands, then kicked his face, making him backflip off onto the ground. As the double blader picked himself up, Lane flashed by, slicing him diagonally, then flipping around, slashing him again vertically. The gear blader flashed forward and gave a powerful slash to Lane. Lane jumped off of the double blader's back, making the gear blader's slash drive into the double blader. The gear blader hurled back to Lane and smashed his blade against Lane's. He made the gears grind again, but this time it just sparked. Lane roared and cut through the gear blade, causing gears and metal to go flying everywhere. The blader then slashed with the remainder of his blade, causing the remaining gears to fly into Lane. He then jumped to the left of Lane and kicked him to the right, pushing him right into a flashing arrow, in which he exploded upon impact. The archer loaded another arrow, this time causing it glow more and more the longer he held it back. The blader kicked Lane in the face and held him back in place as the archer unleashed the arrow in full fury. Lane looked up in pain as the arrow approached. Lane created a wall of fire behind them, then unleashed 2 fireballs forward past the arrow. The fireballs connected and hurled towards the archer. The blader jumped back out of the way and seared in the fire, making him ricochet back to the same spot. The arrow crashed through Lane and the blader, causing them both to dissolve into nothing, but Lane dissolved in fire. The fireball smashed in the ground where the archer jumped back from. Emerging from the smoke of the fireball was Lane.
You guys are real annoying,
said Lane. The archer just smiled as he accepted his inevitable doom. Lane rushed forward and gave 4 quick slashes, toppling the archer for good. Lane kneeled down and finally caught his breath. He tumbled down and realized all the pain he was feeling as blood poured down from his body. He looked up and saw a man with a blue robe and blue hair, with a spiky blue ponytail standing above him. The man smiled.
Am I too late, man?
Lane coughed up blood and rolled on his side.
Yeah, you are.
The man's smile faded into a frown and looked down the cliff at the dead Kshan and Mizo.
So, he's dead? Both of them?
He gave a huge sigh.
Who are these other clowns?
Lane struggled up and looked.
Oh, I dunno. They came after Zion and Mizo died.
So you killed John?
He asked. Lane shook his head.
They? Mizo. They were in a big vortex. There wasn't anything I could do to get in. By the time it closed, Zion was already dead. Sort of.
The man's eyes narrowed as he jumped down from the cliff, picking Kshan and Mizo up.
2 good friends gone over a stupid stone,
said the man sadly.
It might be 3 if I don't get some help,
says Lane, smiling. The man nodded and laid the bodies down near Lane. His arms glue of ice and flung 2 large heaps of ice miles to town. Every few meters the ice erupted into a thin slab of floating ice. He jumped up into the first slab and seeped into it. From there he dashed from one into another at the speed of sound, each breaking as he jumped from them until he reached the last, backflipping down into town. Everyone in town gasped as they saw him. The ice elemental, Jack.
Anyone here have medical spray?
He asked loudly. A man wobbled forward.
I do, but I'll have to make it, and I'm missing a crystal essence stone.
Jack raised an eyebrow. The contest winner, the new general, stepped forward.
I got one.
He tossed it to the doctor.
Okay, just gotta go burn tea.
Jack snatched it from the doctor and the bottle nearby.
I got it, thanks.
He ran off to a large fountain, filled it with water and put the cap on. He jumped up into the mirror floating above the city and jumped from it, causing it to break. He then shot out a flow of ice using it as a grind rail until he reached Lane. The pole shattered. Jack walked up. He held the bottle and stared up.
I'll need some help,
he said, smiling. Lane picked himself up slowly. He was very pale. Jack's smile faded dimly.
You can use fire, right?
Lane nodded and messaged for Jack to lay the stone down and back off. Lane's arms caught fire and he delivered a powerful blast to the stone. Pew! After about 6 seconds, Lane dropped down, all his fire fading. Under the smoke were ashes of the stone in which he put in the bottle of water and shook around. He laid Lane on his back and poured it on the wounds. They smoked, then sealed up, stopping the bleeding.
Okay, let's get out of here,
said Jack as he picked up Kshan, Lane, and Mizo all at once. He carried them and ran off west.